Hello and welcome to this edition of Own the Journey, where we have the opportunity to speak with incredible people from around the world. This week we have the opportunity to speak with Joselyn Baldner, who's the CEO of Central Bank. Jocelyn, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've gotten to know each other really well over the last couple of years, serving on the chamber, and I've been amazed at everything that you have accomplished. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Talk to us just a little bit about how you got to be the CEO at Central Bank. I know your path wasn't normally like a traditional path and kind of had to fight for it a little bit. So talk to us about that.
So I've been with the company for 21 years. I became the CEO in 2021. And prior to that, my background was in the retail banking space. And so really think about all the branches, the ATMs, the bulk of the people that the bank has, that was kind of under my purview. But take it way back, I started as a teller, so really at the ground floor of banking and really learning all of the background, and just, I think in every role, trying to figure out how that role impacts other roles and impacts other areas of the bank. And that's really, I would say, how I grew my career. And then just prior to taking on the CEO role, I took on an additional line of business that traditionally had been a service unit inside our organization and made it a revenue generating unit. And so I think that was the point at which my predecessor said, maybe you could be my successor. Traditionally in a bank, a lot of times a CEO has commercial lending background. I had consumer lending in my background, but not commercial lending. And so when you talk about the non-traditional path, I think there's a lot of bank CEOs that wake up and they say, when they're young, early in their career, and say, that's what I want to be. That's what I want to do, is be a bank CEO. That was not ever something that was, I would say, on my path. And so when you think about taking that route and not having that experience, really my foundation was in really good leadership and good sales management in order to get me into that role.
Nice. But he had to kind of encourage you. I mean, it wasn't something like you just were like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah. So that department I was just talking about that we took from service to revenue, in that we had somebody resign after 28 years of running that department and gave a 2-week notice to retire. And so right from the get-go, I really felt like that was an area that I could make an impact on for the bank. But having that confidence to create a proposal, take it to him. I was an executive at that time, so I already sat on the executive team, but I just told him, I think I would be remiss if I did not bring this forward, because I think I can have an impact here and it would be an additional revenue stream for the bank. And he said, I've never had another executive willing to take on a whole nother line of business just because that was what we needed to do for the company. And so a few months later, he said to me, I really think you could be my successor. And I'm like, yeah, right. Me? No, not me. And just because, I had never seen that. And I told myself and believed you had to have his background in order to be successful, because really he was extremely successful. I didn't want to screw that up. And I saw success written one way. And so even for me, it was hard to think about that being done differently, because I knew I couldn't do it the way he did it. And so that was a lot of why I was doubtful. And he did have to, I would say, convince me, so to speak, somewhat. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not really sure this is ever going to happen, because he didn't get to make the final decision, but I'm going to do everything I can that it could happen when that time comes. And even if it doesn't, I'm better off for all the things that I'm going to do to prepare and be better for the bank. So
that's awesome. So what did you learn through that process? I mean, we hear a lot about imposter syndrome, we hear self-doubt and all of those kind of things. So having to find your own path to success, what did you learn through that process?
I think first I had to create the plan and the map for myself of how that could be successful, and I had to have that picture in my mind and that plan in my mind in order to think about the things I had to put into place to make that happen. I had an incredible team around me, so that was already in place of that had been part of making it a success. So recognizing that you have the team in place. When I was in control of that plan and that path that I had mapped out, I could feel a greater confidence about that. And I knew if this happened, I would need to add this person to the team. If we went this direction, this is the way that I would need to go. So I had thought through all of those scenarios. Then the other thing was I went out and educated myself on the areas where I felt like I had a gap in order to be able to step into that role. And I think, I used a kind of an untraditional method of a coach as I was preparing to even apply for the job. So I did all the background work. I didn't have my degree, my bachelor degree, and I had gotten pretty far in my career without it. And it was a non-starter if I didn't have it. And so I went back at 40 years old and finished my bachelor degree. So that was part of the education. And fortunately, through MSU, I was able to tailor that to the gaps that I had to fill those gaps. And so I knew I needed to do that. And so I did that. But then once I had completed all of those steps, I worked with a coach. When I say a coach, more like she was a StrengthsFinder coach. It was Caitlin Cassie that's local. And really I said, what I need you to help me figure out is, do I even want to do this? Do I even want to take on this role? Because I really love what I'm doing today and the impact I get to have with people. And so what does that look like as I walk forward? And I never wanted to be a commercial lender. Not because I hate the job, but that just wasn't the direction I wanted to go. I wanted to develop people. And so how do I tailor this and focus this so that's what I'm doing, but I have the other experts around me? So I walked through that process. And it's funny, I got to the end of that process with her, and that plan I was talking about was, what if I don't get the job? This is what I think should happen. And she said, that's not what we're here to decide. We're here to decide how we can get you the job and what to best prepare you. If you don't get the job, then you can put that plan into place, but we're not going to talk about that. So, I think she's like, don't make it so that you don't get the role to begin with. Like, you're walking into the interview with basically another plan for them. And why would you do that? So she was really good to kind of speak honesty to me about my thought process. And it was all because of that doubt, that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome. And so that really did help. But then you get the job and then the real work begins, right?
Yeah, the hard work. Well, I think it's really interesting that when we think about the people that are watching and trying to kind of figure out how to navigate through their career, really what helped you get over that was voicing those concerns and getting them out, and then having a coach that can help to kind of smack you around a little bit and be like, no. We got to think in the direction we're going, and don't bring that to the table. So that's awesome. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about your passions, and one of them is developing people. And I know that you've put a ton of time and energy to surround yourself with the people that give you energy that you want to work with. Sometimes they take a little energy, but you really have leaned into culture and people development. Talk to us a little bit about what you learned, what you would recommend for others to do as they're working through what it means to build a strong leadership team.
Absolutely. So I often get the question from young leaders, how did you get to where you are? What did you do? And I think the one thing initially, one of my biggest strengths is individualization. And so getting to know people and letting them also know me as we start to work together and develop relationships. And I've done that with each one of my teams very intentionally in an organic, natural way in order. But I think once they know me and they know what I'm about and I know them and what motivates them, there's a buy-in that's automatically created. we work for a fantastic organization, and I've been here a long, long time, started my career here. I feel like I've been responsible for help building the culture at the bank. And I think some people say it's a little bit taboo to have a family atmosphere today. And I think when we say that and what we think about, because we all come from different families, right? But I think what we're really saying is we're talking about how we care about people, and how we take care of people. And so I think that one thing that my employees will hear a lot from me is I'm here to ensure that we can take the best care of one another, take the best care of our customers that we can. And that results in many different things, increased products and services to our clients, expansion, but at the heart of it, we're doing it for the right reasons. And I think we try to filter that through everything that we do. And that's evolved over time. I feel like we've always been very employee focused, because we want to make it the best place to be, so that is conveyed to our clients and our customers, in wanting to do business with us. And over 21 years, that's really come to fruition in multiple different ways. For the last few years, there's been a heavy focus after COVID on employee engagement. And I feel like we always had that. It just looks different. And I think it has to, as we evolve with our employees, how we take care of our customers and those expectations has not changed. I think just that care and that concern and creating a place people want to be has culturally been very important. From a leadership standpoint, that is something I am extremely passionate about, and you have to have a true heart for people in order to want to do it, because it's hard. It is one of the hardest things that we do. And I think, I have a few things of give people the benefit of the doubt, believe that they want to do the right thing, tell people when they're not. Don't make an assumption they know that they're violating whatever the rules or, whatever it is, and intentionally making the mistake. And I think when you approach situations like that, and then just being very forward thinking about how your decisions impact the whole, and that's something that I've tried to teach. And I see. I've had to, over the last few years, bring several leaders up from a peer role into a leader role, and thinking really intentionally, if they've come from outside the organization, how do I train them on our culture? How do I teach them what it means to be a central banker and how we do that a little bit different? And so I've had the opportunity, even at my level, I often say I feel like I have a little bit less impact than I've ever had before. And it's really because I am even more depending on influencing others to be able to carry out the vision of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I heard you say some really important things there. I mean, the individualism that you talked about in leaning into people. You're talking about the foundation of building trust. Good relationships are built on trust. If your team trusts you, and that's carried forward all the way through to your customers. And when you're talking about something as sensitive as money and those relationships, trust is just foundational. So how does that look for you when you think about individualism? How are you developing those relationships? Is it just in one-on-one meetings, or are you going to lunches, all the above? Like, what's it take to build that trust?
All of the above, but it really starts from the day somebody walks into new employee orientation. I tell them about myself. I talk about my career journey. Vulnerability, I think, is really important in leadership. Being able to tell people, I don't always get it right, and I don't always have all the answers. I have a very collaborative style, so I think that contributes as well, of getting people's opinions and listening. And when you ask, you better listen, and you better be ready to do something besides your own idea. And I think I've tried to demonstrate that over time. The other thing I think is really making sure people know they need to work within their strengths. And so when I think of individualism, I have 15 branch managers, and they all have the same expectations, but they're all different people, and they do it a little bit differently. Giving someone the freedom to execute and get the results in the same, differently, person to person, I think is critically important. But just as critical is if you have people in a similar role and one is good at X and the other one is good at Y. Why not give that person who's good at X all of those projects to funnel? If they're good at it, and then make this other person on the team responsible for something else. But I think sometimes we get caught up in it's easy as a leader to need consistency and execution. It's harder to do what I'm talking about and really play to people's strengths and let people do the things that they're really good at, even if that means maybe that the role they're in today isn't what they should be in. So figuring that out, and I think over the last few years as I've taken this role and we've gone through multiple changes in the organization, that is something that we've really had to be focused on to figure out and not be afraid to pivot in the process of that.
Well, I love the idea of really leaning into the strengths of the individual, but that means that when you do have a promotion, a turnover or something like that, that it can create a little bit more turnover or turmoil in the environment. So that's what makes it tougher, because you're catering to the human instead of the role.
Absolutely.
And so I think that speaks to,
which in the long term serves us better.
Yes.
The organization serves us better. And so you asked, I said new employee orientation. I do one-on-ones with all my direct reports. We do skip levels, and so meeting with additional people on teams. I try to draw people that are not always involved into committees and into, if we want to change something, in the business, get stakeholders involved, not just leaders, and get them at the table and get them involved in the conversation. And we've tried to do that quite a bit.
So from a weekly schedule, how much time are you spending with people versus like strategic priorities and moving the bank forward in new ways?
Well, let's add a few other duties in there. Let's see. People, I honestly, I probably have too many direct reports. You and I have discussed this before. I have 10 direct reports, and I meet with each one of them one-on-one monthly. Okay. And so, but also we're the head problem solver, generally speaking. And so, week to week, I would say probably people 40, 60% strategic, I would say.
All the other stuff.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift and talk about some of the other stuff just really quick. You're hugely involved in our community. You devoted numerous hours to the chamber and led the chamber and other organizations that you're involved with and volunteer your time. Why is that so important to you? Why do you put the energy into it?
Sure. I think as a community banker, I truly believe it's our obligation to give back to the community that does so much for us. So that's number one. And I think as I've gotten more involved in things, I get to flex some muscles in that space that I don't always get to do anymore inside my organization. So I think it drives, for me. And I get the opportunity to work on important initiatives in the community that I think that are important, driving us forward for the future. So those are really the drivers behind why I do what I do.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that when we recognize that investing in our communities in that way, and the people and the relationships, it all comes full circle. I mean, it's good for us, and it's been awesome for me to see the leadership that you've brought to organizations like the Chamber, because you've had a big influence from your experiences and your skills in navigating through people, puzzles, and all the things, and bringing that to the table. And a lot of those nonprofit organizations haven't had the chance to have those experiences yet, or have that leadership skill set, those muscles. And so when you can step in and do that, it really makes a difference. Yeah,
I think even in my wrap-up comments for being at the Chamber and my time there, because that ended in December, I made sure that I talked about that, because I think often those organizations are not getting a lot poured into them from a team and a leadership perspective. And so I hope that I can add that additional element in my service to those organizations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge difference, and we've seen it. I mean, it's
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the personal side, the dynamics of life and what it means to navigate through kind of the non-traditional path and make it through school, all the things. So talk to us about what it meant to go back to school at 40, young family, dealing with all the stuff.
So I have 3 girls.
Yeah.
My girls are 26, 22, and 21. I have a grandson, super exciting. But at the time that prior to going back and finishing my degree, I actually went to banking school at Stonier and the Wharton Business School, and which was a fantastic opportunity for me. That was 3 summers. 2 weeks each summer. It was assignments in between. It was like a graduate program before my bachelor's, so I did it in reverse.
Yeah.
And that my kids were involved in sports. I had to had a conversation with my husband like this. I need to do this for the growth of my career, and he was extremely supportive, you know, in doing that. But I sat down with my whole family when I went back to school because I had big intentions to get it done very quickly. I was done with school. I had achieved what I needed to at that point in my career. Yeah, and so I'm like, I don't have to do that. Yeah. And okay, now I have to do that. And so we sat down as a family and had a conversation about it because I said, everybody's going to have to step up because I'm going to be, you know, I already worked a job that was about 50-ish hours a week. And so to add that in, you know, taking 10 hours a semester, trying to get it done as quickly as I could. And so they did, and they were all very supportive. My girls are incredibly proud of me. And, but you know, at the end of the day, for me, that's what it's all about is my kids. I mean,
Sure.
No one's going to remember, you know, me as a bank CEO, but mom and grandma and not Grandma JoJo is going to be remembered. So, you know, I think I try to always, the first year of being CEO, my daughter Sydney was a senior in high school and played volleyball. And I said, I will not miss any of that. And so I didn't. So I think it's just, you know, you go through different cycles of your life, I believe. And in the first 2 to 3 years that I was in this role, that it looked different than it does even today, you know, in time commitment and where you split your time and what your priorities are. And so they always come first.
But I think the lesson there is, you know, leadership is a family commitment. It's not just a role because the whole family has to come together, step up, do the things, make sacrifices in order to fulfill those commitments and do it well anyway.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing that I heard you say that I think that we need to do a lot better job of doing as leaders, and we've talked about how in 2025 a lot of leaders are investing in themselves, and which I think is refreshing and good to see because that pays forward in all the things. But what I heard you say is intentionality. You know, based on the season of life that you're in and what's going on, you know, can you, you know, devote your time into family, chamber, other nonprofit organizations, but doing both at the same time probably wouldn't work. So understanding what that focus is at that season of life.
I also think what is so refreshing is that we're all talking about it as well, as far as devoting the time, you know, to ourselves, to grow ourselves. I think we get very in our organizations and growing our organizations in the community and those things, but we can't do that effectively if we're also not pouring into ourselves. And I think that when you run at the pace that we do a lot of times in all of those things that we're talking about, I listen to podcasts and I read books and I do all of those things. So for me, it's a different kind of level of input to me. But you're right. You know, I talked with Lori Robertson early on about, I said, because she's like, how are you doing everything that you're doing? And I said, because right now I have to. And everybody around me knows that. My work team knows that and my home team knows that. And they know that this is what I have to do right now, but it won't look like this forever. And so even in the last year, I could slow the pace a little bit from a community standpoint. And everybody's like, yeah, but Jocelyn, you're on this board and this board. Yes, I am still on, you know, several of those boards, but what I get to pick and choose a little bit more, where it was more of a just say yes to get really deep and involved first, and now I can be much more intentional about my time.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable, and congrats for pulling it off, because you're doing.
We work at it every day, though, right? I mean, it's hard.
Yeah. So as you've navigated through all those things, you've had some forks in the road, you've had some challenges along the way. As you reflect back, what were some of the bigger left and right, decisions that you had to make that were really tough, that maybe you're happy with, or maybe it's like, oh, that was a bad one, I had to pivot and then make a different choice?
So I, about mid-career, I would say, I had a very challenging situation with a supervisor. And what's ironic in those situations, it's a person that taught me probably the most in my career also. And so for me, the fork was a couple things. One, figuring out what to emulate, what not to emulate. Very concerned about being associated with that type of reputation when it was so different from who I am as a leader and a worker and a person, and really trying to figure out how to do that respectfully to that person and to myself, and forge a different path, because I knew I was in the long term. I knew that person probably wasn't. And so how do I preserve what I loved and the organization that I worked for in a really toxic situation? Wow. And it had become very toxic, and I was part of that, because it was so hard to navigate that everyone around us knew it, and we were all kind of in on it of, what's the temperature today? Is everything going to go okay? And there was just, it got to the point where I finally sat everyone down. No one reported to me, but they were on my team. And I said, we're not doing this anymore. We cannot do this anymore. It's not healthy for any of us. We know what the gig is. We're either choosing to be here or we're choosing not to be here, but it cannot go on how it is, and we got to move forward.
Wow.
And so we all stayed. But the attitude and the environment became very different, and the tolerance for what was happening became less, but we were reacting to it different, and that person moved on probably within 5 months.
Wow.
Of that kind of epiphany and hard stop of things. And I learned a lot in that situation, a lot of lessons that I can carry in today, but so much of what I know is from that person in training me and preparing me for my career. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity as well. And then I would say that I have been very fortunate that I've had a lot of opportunity afforded to me. And I always looked at it as luck. And I heard someone say recently, be really prepared so when the luck comes, you're ready.
Yes.
And I thought, that's right. That's actually right. I think when I've gotten to this point, and I've had so many people ask me, how'd you get there? How'd you get there? And I didn't feel like I had a good answer. I needed to get real clear with myself. How did I get here? How did this happen? What are the things that happened? And I did a lot of preparing. And so I think that in my career, I don't have a lot of regrets, because I think I wouldn't be where I am today if I wouldn't have taken the path that I did.
Sure.
And I think now I'm still trying to forge that path as the CEO, because it's different than what my success has looked like in the past and how exactly I got here. It's different going forward.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of wisdom in there. So breaking a few things down. One, you're a middle manager, which I think is one of the hardest jobs in any organization, because you have to manage up, you have to manage sideways, and you have to manage down and do all of those things. So you had the courage as a middle manager to kind of outmanage your boss in that circumstance, and that's really tough.
It was tough, but I'd been there a long time. I'd worked for this person for 9 years at this point.
Okay.
I was the right-hand person of that person, and I had a lot of respect of the peers that I was on the team with.
Yeah.
And I had built credibility with them that I think they looked up to me in that. And if I had not done all of those things and executed really well on everything, that relationships, building relationships, my work, results, I couldn't have done what I did.
Right.
I don't think.
Yeah. Being prepared. Being ready.
Prepared. And what I didn't mention in there is there was a confrontation, with the boss. But essentially saying what I just said to you, I'm your right-hand person. You trust me with everything. But when it comes to making decisions, you want complete agreeance of everything, and that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
But it's okay because you're the decision maker, and I will support those decisions. And that was kind of the impetus of change. And that took a lot of courage on my part that I had to build up to, knowing that needed to happen and that conversation needed to take place. But again, if I didn't have the credibility and I believed that I had the support of upper management of the bank, I couldn't have done that.
Yeah. Well, I think navigating through those things fundamentally, you're talking about the same traits that you still use today. Absolutely. I think some of our best lessons come from bad leadership.
Yes, I agree.
I got my ass kicked more than once, good, better, and different. But I learned a lot of lessons from that. And what you did in that circumstance is you brought the same respect towards that individual. It's like, that's okay. You didn't emulate the behavior. Instead, you maintained your own style and led into it, and that set a new tone, and which led to all the positive things.
Well, and you and I dealt with a situation recently that I drew upon that experience to help me with that situation, and being able to navigate through another difficult leadership situation that was outside our purview, really.
Yeah. Well, I think navigating through those tough times gives us the skills and prepares us to solve problems that we don't even know we're going to have yet. And
Absolutely.
so that's interesting and challenging. So when you think about just the overall culture in the world that's changing today, how are you thinking about the middle managers, leadership, the way that you all have to deal? I mean, turnover's high in the world. So what are you doing at Central Bank in order to, drive retention, drive that culture in the right ways that really support the team well? And I think, something that you said along the way that I want to highlight is people want to work someplace where they feel appreciated and they feel a part of a team that matters.
Right.
And I know that that's part of your goal. So how are you building that into the culture?
So a few things there. You mentioned turnover. We did have our highest turnover in 2024, resulting from several things. But one of the things is providing opportunities for growth for people. There's only so many of those. Yes. And how do you figure out to do that within their roles or their teams, where the same satisfaction can come from being in an actual stated leadership role. So that's, one of the things that we're really working on is leadership development, because I think I can only do so much. Our leaders have to deploy the culture that we're trying to do. So ensuring that they're trained. In my world, where it's so heavily regulation driven and compliance driven and rules, and you have to do that, and it's not always fun. How to make sure people know, people trust us with their money. That's a big deal. And how do we ensure that we can be a fun culture, but a serious culture, and making sure that they know that we can take care. So creating those boundary lines, I think for people to continue to attract people to banking, because that's a challenge for us, and that's really about the organization and how do we attract them to the organization. So I think leadership training is really big. We do an employee survey on an annual basis. In the last 2 years, our employee survey has told us that 8.5 out of 10 people will recommend somebody to come to work for Central Bank.
That's awesome.
So that's a stick realistic. We're always, measuring and looking at, but more importantly, why. Understanding and identifying why, and communicating that back to the employees, but creating an action plan around the things that are opportunities, and they give us input on that. So, they may tell us technology is an issue, but what does that mean? What exactly does that mean for you? And trying to make sure that we communicate transparently and openly about how we're handling some of those things. It's interesting, we just had somebody come into a leader retreat for us at the end of the year, and we did some work on generations. What the information showed us is there's actually not a whole lot of difference between the generations. It's just in the way that they still want to be motivated. They still want the love of the place to work. They still want ethics. They still want to be ethical and they want to have fun, but they just do it in different ways, which was a little bit eye-opening and surprising. It was not what I was expecting, because I definitely feel like there's been a culture shift of how we have to handle our workforce. And employee engagement's always been incredibly important to us, but making sure that we're thinking intentionally about employee engagement and the things that we're doing, parties you're having, events you're having, do we still like it? Do we not like it? And so getting our employees involved in that part of it. And then I think looking for outside opportunities to educate and give them additional value in their growth and their career growth. And doing it all knowing they may leave. They may go somewhere else, but it's the right thing for us to do for the organization and for our people, and just making sure that we're constantly, that's something that's a priority always on our strategic plan, just like any business goal we have.
Well, I think it's awesome. I heard somebody say not too long ago, what if you educate them and they leave? And the response was, well, what if you don't and they stay?
Absolutely.
It's like, you constantly have to invest in people and do things. So I heard at the collective this week, we were having, somebody mentioned that they changed their employee survey to "We really want to know." So they made an acronym for "We really want to know," which I think was a fun way of doing it, because that's what we're all driving for. So what's the truth? How do we become better, and what's your perspective, and how do we drive that? Learning, opportunity, growth, whatever it is. So. So what's next for culture for you guys? When you think about, turnover's high, what are you shifting into, rather than just, we've got the survey, we've got the data? What did that result in for you guys?
So we create an action plan out of that. So I went around and did listening sessions with all of our employees. And we did a little different in 24 than we did in 23. We opened it up. So we didn't do it by team. We just opened it up wide. And I had 3 or 4 questions that I asked and opened it to the group. I had somebody there to take notes, and we assimilated all of that, and we've communicated out a plan based on that, which didn't shift much from 23 to 24. But the response that we got from, you're willing to come out, you're willing to sit and listen, you're not squashing our ideas, you're taking notes, and you're actually bringing something back to us that the organization is going to do, and we're going to tell you, you'll be able to see what we're doing, because tangibly you can see some things, but also we're going to tell you along the way, we're going to give you updates on what that looks like and what we're doing. Talent acquisition, retention has been a focus for us for the last few years. I think you're seeing people not stay at jobs very long, so that's something we're constantly talking about as a leadership team. How do we impact that? And we're doing career conversations, we're doing one-on-ones, we're doing job shadowing, we're doing formal mentorships, and we're moving people into roles that, we're fortunate. We have multiple different lines of business that people can work in. And so we're trying to afford people the opportunity to go job shadow, figure that out, but also then talk about, what education do you need to do this? What kind of training do you need? What's the timeline look like? And be realistic with that, because I can't promote you into a leadership role. Just having, some real honest conversations, but also being more open to that that happening in a quicker timeline than maybe what you're all comfortable with at times, and that's okay. And so recruitment looks a little different, so it's affected in recruiting and the materials and what we look like as an organization. We don't want to be an old stuffy bank, you know, and so that's, I think, the stigma of being a banker. Even that is against us a little bit, and trying to get into the schools and recruit a little bit earlier and get people interested in what we do. We also are part of a holding company. We have our own technology company, and so we are able to attract other positions, and at a local level, even if we don't have those positions open locally, they can still work local and do those positions remotely. And so always keeping that top of mind from a recruitment standpoint for our whole organization.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I heard a couple of things. One, and I think that this is true kind of globally, that you're having to be a lot more intentional about communicating with the team. I'm not just coming in, I'm not just checking a box. No. If I'm investing in this organization, I want that reciprocated. I want to know how my contributions matter, how it's moving the company forward, and that you heard me, and that you're responding to that global feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is important for organizations to communicate, that we try to do a good job of communicating inside of JMark, and that is the way we create career opportunities is to grow. And so many organizations are like, why do we have to grow so fast? Why are we talking about growth? Well, that drives careers. I mean, if you don't have those openings to move people into, everybody can get stagnant. And so that growth is critical and a part of the strategic priorities.
And I think in reiterating for us in the last year that we're engaged with you, how do you engage back with us? What does that accountability both ways look like? And teaching coachability and how you're an advocate of your own career, and how do you participate in that process, not just make it the business job or your leader's job to do that, but how do there's a collaborative relationship here that we've got to work together to make that happen. And sharing information, to your point about growth, sharing information. How do we grow? How are we growing? What does that look like? Why is that important? You know, when people hear, our net earnings number, they think, wow, that's a lot of money. It is, but I want you to understand what it takes for us to be able, to do that. So I think education and getting them more ingrained and understanding how the business runs as well gets them also more invested. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Get them involved in committees, get them involved in the organization, give them some buy-in and some ownership of some things that are happening within the organization, and you increase that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Well, I know one of the things that is critical in how you operate in your team is gratitude. You do that inside your organization, you do that in your family, you do that in the community. When you think back over, the years of business, and you think, these are some of the lessons that I'm most grateful for, what comes to mind?
It's interesting. When I was a 19-year-old at college the first time, I was thinking about my dad and him working, and I lived in a small town, grew up in Higginsville. My dad drove to Kansas City every day, 75 miles one way to work. And man, as a bratty teenager, I would get really irritated that he would never be there for anything, at night, in the evenings, no volleyball games, no track meets, award banquets, that kind of thing. And why at 19, I can't remember what happened, that it just struck me, wow, like he did that for us. He did that not because he wanted to miss the things or he was too tired or didn't want to go. And, he did that for us. So I think that lesson of gratitude started very early as a model for me to see in my life. And so my kids really hate when I say, yeah, but what are they thinking? How do you think that person felt about that situation? Her mom, stop. I'm like, yes, but I just think being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand that perspective gives you such a better perspective about the decisions that you are making. And I think I've been afforded a lot of opportunity. I said that earlier, to sit at tables. Everywhere we moved, my husband worked for Circuit City, and we relocated a few times. And everywhere I went, I got a better opportunity and a better position when we went to a new community. And I was so grateful for that, because it was a new place, a new opportunity. And I just think because of so many things that have been that I've had the opportunity to do, I try to ensure that I am kind of living that out as well for other people. Servant leadership is definitely who I am. It's the definition of who I am. And that is what actually brings me joy. And so I think it's rooted in that.
Yeah. How has that shaped the way that you think about just being a leader and representing all of those things? That's had to be fundamental in all things.
Yeah, equally my kids and the people who work for me get irritated. They're like, oh, like, can't we just focus on this? But it informs our decisions if we understand the full scope of a situation. Yeah. Not to delay a decision, not to delay something that we're trying to do, but really to make a better decision. And I think that I think about impact a lot. And as I've gotten frustrated with some leaders who really struggle with global communication as they come up through their career that really never have had to do it. And so teaching people how to think like that, I've had to get really clear on why it's important, and really it's impact to your audience. It's trying to answer all questions up front, create the doubt. Don't let them fill in the blank. You fill in the blank for them. And so in helping that shape them into leaders, having them understand that global communication piece, other side, impact, I think is I sum it up by saying, think about the impact.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about true empathy in your leadership style, because what is it like to sit in their seat? Right. I know when I'm preparing for a company meeting or an event, I try to envision myself as that individual. What's it like to sit in this person's shoes as a level 1 engineer, hearing this information? What does it mean to digest that? And if you're not filling in those blanks and answering those questions, one of my favorite sayings is, in the absence of facts, people make shit up.
Absolutely.
So if you don't fill in the blanks,
they do it. They do it for you. And you don't want them to create the narrative. I think all of those things are equally important.
Yeah. So as we wrap things up, one of my favorite questions that I get to ask everybody is, what's one of your most favorite pieces of advice?
Grace changes everything. So simple. Empathy, grace changes everything.
So good. Well, Jocelyn, thank you so much. I want to raise a glass to you and say cheers. Congratulations for owning your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.